Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's a great day for liberty. My name is Dan Fishman. I am the executive director of the People for Liberty. And today we have a tremendous guest. Most people in the liberty movement are familiar with antiwar.com. They've seen the signs, I'm already against the next war. They've seen the bumper stickers, antiwar.org. And a lot of people know that the man behind it is Scott Horton. Scott's been in this, if I can use the word fight, for quite a while. And one of the things about it is that as you get involved in an action, in activism against a certain thing, you become more than just an activist, you also become a scholar. And in reading Scott's most recent book, one of the things that impressed me was that although there's advocacy in there, and we're going to talk about that as we talk about the book, it is also a work of tremendous scholarly importance because it really documents what the war on terrorism has meant for American people, the origins for it, and how it impacts our life on a daily basis. And so to that end, let me bring in Scott Horton. Scott, welcome to Liberty Lunch Power Hour.
Happy to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
So one of the things that is astonishing to me about your book is that it came out very quickly, and you've got it behind you as well, Enough Already, End the War on Terror. Available on Amazon. People want to buy it. It's available at scotthorton.org, as well as all of Scott's back catalogs. We talked about a scholarly body of work. All that stuff is there as well. I definitely recommend you go to scotthorton.org, buy a copy of the book, check out a lot of his previous broadcasts. But so this book, you published it essentially right on the cusp of Biden taking office. So you had things to say then, right? So essentially, you know, we had this hope that things were going to change with the new administration.
Well, not too much. I mean, the story is one of continuity. And I think, you know, one of the kind of running themes or even jokes through the book is just how often we change sides. But I think you also notice that all the side changing happens kind of in the middle of presidential administrations. So the policy doesn't change so much between Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, as much as in the middle of Bush, the policy flips from one thing to another. And then, you know, things like that. And, you know, in the Reagan years and Bush senior years as well, right? It wasn't a big change from Bush senior to Bill Clinton. The big change happened during Bush senior, and Bill Clinton picked it up from there, essentially. So it's not, the story is not one of partisan shifts back and forth as much as actual presidents themselves shifting back and forth.
It's almost as if the guiding hand is larger than a political one and more of a industrial one that has a different purpose than just getting elected to the presidency.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, it's an entire industry, of course, the military industrial complex, and now its entire mirror image with the Homeland Security industrial complex that's grown up in this century.
And one of the amazing things about it for me, so as a person, I grew up in tech. I worked for Palm back in the day. We made the first handheld device, things like that, is how immediately the tech industry started seeking out military dollars. How can the special things that we're working on be sold to the government? Because that's where the feed is. And you see observance cameras, drones, all these things that, you know, were sort of technological toys in the beginning. Very quickly, people say, oh, look, we can adapt that to the military. And now the military is spending a lot of money on it.
That's right. And it's, this is what David Stockman calls it, the great deformation of the government intervention in the economy since the Great Depression, really, but especially since World War II, in the form of all this militarism, that it just absolutely distorts the shape of our economy into this whole different thing. I mean, what you just touched on there couldn't possibly be overstated. The amount of engineering and ingenuity that is diverted by these perverse incentives from government spending for going from productive uses to simply designing the next machine gun for the top of the next armored vehicle instead.
Yeah. And you know, you talk about David Stockman. I actually I have a quote of David Stockman's from your book in here. Former Reagan era budget director David Stockman has emphasized time and again, it doesn't matter who controls the oil field. The only effective cure for high oil prices is the free market. There is no economic case whatsoever for Washington's massive military presence in the Middle East. I actually had planned that slide for a little later, but I didn't know you were going to give me the Stockman quote right to begin with. But it is astonishing that in terms of the economic costs of the war on terror, and obviously war in general when we're talking about it, but the economic cost of the war on terror has impoverished Americans so dramatically, people don't really understand not just the blood that we have spilled, but the treasure that has been invested in propping up dictators, maintaining bases overseas, and then the investment in, you look at this amazing, when we brought home our first robot, our first iRobot, and I said to my wife, this is it. We have our first home robot and it's going to change our life. But iRobot for a long time was selling things to the government because that's where the money was, because the government wouldn't invest in anything.
Mm-hmm. There's this great article by Richard Cummings from 2007 in playboy.com. You can find it at corpwatch.org. I don't think they even have it at the Playboy site anymore. You can find it at corpwatch.org and at my site, the Libertarian Institute website. We've reprinted it there, or maybe it's at scotthorton.org. Anyway, it's called Lockheed Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. And
it's a great title.
Yeah, it is. It's great. And it's a great piece. And I interviewed him about it back then too. And essentially the story was, and I'm sorry, I always forget the name of the airplane, but in the 1970s, Lockheed spent $3 or $4 billion developing a new jet, essentially to compete with the 737 or the DC-5 or whatever it was at the time. And DC, whatever number, I don't know. I was a kid in the 70s. But the point is that nobody wanted it. I think it was Delta or American bought a few of them and then decided that, no, they were just going to go with Boeing instead. They just had, the 737 or 57 or whatever it was at the time was the superior plane. So they had a big board meeting and said, man, competing in the free market is hard and we don't want to. And so they decided that what they would do is that they would just focus on the Pentagon, and they would have this captive market in the Pentagon. And then the only people they have to convince is congressmen who aren't spending their own money at all, or, aren't responsible to any kind of shareholders, only voters. And that's a lot easier. And so they just decided to be a military only firm from that point on. And then very quickly they decided that, it would be good for our business if we would help bankroll a lot of think tanks to write up excuses for which wars we should be in. That way we know what kind of weapons to develop. Yeah. Because if we're going to fight in Europe, we need these kind of weapons. If we're going to fight in the Middle East, we need these kind of weapons. So let's set the policy so that then we know which kind of weapons to make, so we always have an edge on our competitors, which all of this makes perfect business sense in a corrupt world empire. Right.
And it's a fascinating thing because it leads us, well, as you would imagine, sort of leads us back to the fact that what's been going on for a long time is, everybody's talking now about the big lie of the election, but we've been living in a big lie for a really long time. And the war on terror is predicated on a lot of the big lie. So let me bring in another quote from the book here. So September 11th, America's wars have helped to increase the ranks of the bin Ladenites from 400 to 40,000 at the height of the Islamic State, spread throughout the Middle East, East, North, West, and Middle East and North, and West and East Africa. So a couple of big things there. First of all, it's very clear that, and for people who are following along, you can stop the tape, watch it. I've indicated the pages on the Kindle Institute where all these quotes are. So like I said, I recommend buying the Kindle copy. It's really, really good. Very easy to consume. And there's highlights in there as well of really important passages. So first thing, that 400 to 40,000, right? I think nobody would disagree with the fact that bin Ladenites, and we'll come back to that term as well, but the war on terror has grown our enemies in this field.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So looking at that, and even the people who would say, well, war on terror is justified, something like that, they would agree that we've grown the thing. let's talk about your specific phrasing there of the bin Ladenites, because that's different than saying Al Qaeda. It's different than saying ISIS. It's different than saying, what's the Republican phrase? Radical
fascists.
Exactly. Radical Islamism, whatever it is. Bin Ladenites is a very specific phrase. Why did you choose to use that term?
Yeah, well, because they are at the core leadership, certainly radical Islamists who are leading this insurgency against the United States. That much is true. Yeah. But what's important about their radicalism is their political radicalism, right? Because someone can be an absolutely uncompromising extremist in terms of religious fundamentalism and could still be a quote unquote quietist, as they're called. And for example, in America, the broad tradition of American Protestantism was, or I shouldn't say that, but the more fundamentalist and evangelical Christians was to stay out of politics because they're so focused on passing the test of the mortal life to live in the afterlife. And that's what it's really all about. So it's a mistake to conflate fundamentalist Islam of all different kinds, whether Shiite Islam in Iran, which is a very conservative and fundamentalist regime that rules there, or whether you're talking about the Wahhabists and the Salafists, who are essentially the most extreme branches of Sunni Islam, that, well, just look at the fact, right? There are millions and millions of Salafists and Wahhabists, and that means people who either want to, and I guess the Wahhabists are more focused on interpreting the word literally, and in the original interpretations, and the Salafists are more intent on living in the past in the way that the Prophet lived back then. This kind of, so you have millions of people who believe in this, but who are not political radicals and do not fight in the wars, did not travel to Iraq to join the Islamic State, or even to fight with Al Qaeda in Iraq in the war before that. And who have no interest in politics at all, other than obeying the Quran, which says essentially, like American Christians like to cite Romans 13, render unto Caesar. Well, they cite their own passages that say, do what your local monarch says, and let God sort them out later. That part isn't your business. And so then what is the bin Ladenite, to get to your question? Sorry. What is the bin Ladenite? These guys are essentially Leninists, right? And I don't mean that they're communists, but I just mean that they're hell-bent revolutionaries. So they're right-wing reactionaries in a religious sense and all of that, but they're hardcore revolutionaries who want to overturn the entire system of power from Afghanistan to Nigeria. And this is these people, and I guess I call them bin Ladenites because no one else does, right? People want to, and look, and it's not just Al Qaeda, because bin Ladenites, in a sense, I'm being overly broad with that too, because that could mean people who agree with bin Laden and act as bin Laden would have them act, who never had any direct association with them necessarily, right? So, I could be accused of defining it too broadly, but I'm saying the point is, this is who is at war against us. Are the people who define themselves as political radicals who want to attack the West in order to destroy or one way or the other negate our intervention in the Middle East, so that then they can have their way.
And it's perfect. I have a feeling that every topic we get to is going to lead me down two paths that I want to take. And let me start with this first one, which is it fair, this phrase, the phrase of the bin Ladenites, to say that there is sort of an analog in the United States, in that there are a lot of people who are pro-life, but then there are a few activists, your Eric Rudolphs, or other people who have committed acts of violence in the name of that. And most people who, if you would say you're in the pro-life movement, they would say, I have nothing to do with these people who are involved in these incredible acts of violence. And there's sort of that analog there. Is that fair?
Look at what happened when they attack us. People run to join the army to fight against them. And there was a huge, especially 20 years ago, there was a huge aspect to this among the evangelical Christian right in America, that this is somehow part of the scheme to force Jesus to come back sooner, so we don't have to die alone, and so they were joining up. And if you said that, they're joining up because if bin Laden said they're joining up because they're radical Christians and they're on a crusade and they want to kill all Muslims, then we would scoff and say, no, it was the killing. It was the violence in our most important city that we're going to defend ourselves from. Well, same thing on the other side. We correctly identify them as religious extremists, sure, but that's mostly just begging the question about, oh, see, they're religious kooks, so then therefore that proves what I say when I say that that's why they do what they do. When in fact, no, it was the violence perpetrated against people in the Middle East by our government and by our proxy sock puppet dictatorships over there that turned, in fact, our government's former agents, former mercenaries against us in the first place. And that's what it is. So yes, they are religious kooks. So are some of us, but that's not really what this is about. It's about power and dominance and violence. All of it. Did I lose you? You froze up on me. Uh-oh. Now really, uh-oh. Well, Dan, can you hear me? Man, should I leave and try to come back? Can you hear me? Oh, I think maybe he's gone, folks. Am I still on?
Hi, Scott.
Hi.
This is Holly Ward.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, I'm the Vice President for People for Liberty, and Dan just gave me a call. Hi, Scott. This is Holly Ward. Sorry, I hear myself in another window now. His house has just lost power.
Oh, no. Well, so you guys want to try to reschedule the second part of this later on?
I think that'd be the most.
Should we hang out? I mean, his power might come right back on, right?
I can hope so. So happy to carry on a conversation. I'm nearly not as prepared as Dan, obviously. He had amazing interview questions lined up for you. But Scott, I'm a longtime listener, first time caller, I suppose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know. So I actually separated from the military for a lot of opposition to the military industrial complex, and I appreciate acknowledgement for that earlier, and just how your career has evolved. I have your book. I haven't read it yet. It's somewhere in my massive bookshelf of things.
Believe me, I understand how that goes.
Yes, sorry, my daughter is here. Wasn't expecting this, but you know, she made a great comment as we were listening along. We were talking about ending wars in the complexes. She said, "Well, that seems like a good idea. Shouldn't we want to end all the wars? Like, wouldn't that be smart?" So Scott, in your history and plethora of knowledge in the military-industrial complex, I guess we've talked about power a little bit, but what would you say motivates the politicians to continue this narrative as long as it has?
Yeah, well, it's all vested interests, right? Special interests. So what your daughter said is obviously just from the default basic point of view of a regular human being, American citizen, who's concerned about the future of our country and what it is that we're supposed to do. And any regular person in your neighborhood's understanding is that peace is the standard in a constitutional republic, and war is just temporary in the event of an absolute emergency to protect our lives and our liberty, and that's it.
Absolutely.
And yet here we are, a generation deep into war that have been nothing but catastrophic in every way. And so then the explanation for, or the question that you raise is the obvious one. Why does this continue this way? And really the answer is because that's what Lockheed wants. That's what the Pentagon wants. The different generals and admirals and everyone with their own individual ambitions inside the service. And that's what Saudi Arabia wants. And that's what Israel wants. And that's what England and France and Germany want. And that's what Japan and South Korea want, is for America to be the world empire and maintain the status quo. And so the American people are in 10th place when it comes to our opinion about the way things ought to be and our understanding that this is our country and its national foreign policy is supposed to serve our interests. But you look at the power of the Israel lobby, for example, they blow the American people out of the water. We stand no chance against that level of organization and that amount of money that is designed around a single purpose, lobbying this government to make sure to secure that foreign nation's interests, no matter what it costs the American people.
So Scott, and I see we've got Dan, it looks like we're getting tech set back up. So Dan, just go ahead and get yourself situated. We have the same storm here, and you're muted, Dan. I don't know if that's on purpose or not, but Scott.
I'm not purposely muting, so yeah, I appreciate you sticking on, Scott. Lost all part of it. I had to reset the router. Back on the phone, computer's right. And of course, now the embarrassing thing is that I have the green screen in the background and all that other stuff too.
And your audio is terrible, my friend.
Yeah, Dan, you're really cutting in and out there.
Okay, I should be back online in 3 minutes. So if you guys can fill till then.
Great.
Okay.
Well, it won't be Phil because Scott, so I'm finishing my dissertation. I'm getting a PhD in public administration. And what I'm focusing my studies on is the lack of public representation within the administration itself. And so we're talking about the strength of lobbying here.